Okay, good afternoon. Thank you everybody for joining this public hearing with the Chief Minister, Chief Executive and other bodies making up the government as our continuation of the One Gov review panel, public hearing part 2. This of course is a scrutiny hearing, so all normal scrutiny functions apply. We are still meeting remotely, of course, so in a moment we'll ask everybody to reintroduce ourselves. This is for an hour. It continues on where we left off last time. There's a series of questions that each member will ask. Just need to remind everybody that we only got an hour and it's a very busy day for all. So again, if we can keep questions to a short punchy mode and obviously answers, of course, Chief Minister and everybody responding as succinct as possible, so we can make sure that we get everybody off in time. Lastly, also, just I mentioned at the end of the last hour, we did, from my perspective, just a reminder, I'm the new chair of this review panel, so very much picking up where the previous panel left off. So I'm still in learning mode, so to speak. So if, and also for public benefit, when we're talking jargon, so to speak, if we could refrain from that or explain from that, that would be really helpful. So bearing all of that in mind, let's reintroduce everybody, starting on the scrutiny side. I'll go first, obviously. So my name is Deputy Kevin Hamlin of St Saviour, and I am the chair of this review panel.
Okay, shall I go next? Yeah, Deputy Robert Ward, and I'm a member of the panel.
Deputy Steve Iyer, I'm a member of the panel.
Deputy Kirsten Morell, member of the panel.
That's it from the scrutiny side, Chief Minister.
Okay, sorry, thanks. I was just waiting for the go ahead. Okay, Senator John LaFondre, Chief Minister.
Charlie Parker, Chief Executive.
John Quinn, Chief Operating Officer.
Catherine Madden, Chief of Staff.
Mark Grimley, Director of Corporate Services.
Okay, I think that's everybody from our side as well.
Okay, thanks everybody. Of course, this will be uploaded as watching, to those watching live, it will be uploaded also. We will put all those links on social media for those who want to watch it back later. So we're going to pick up where we left off, Chief Minister. We're going to follow up with the Comptroller and Auditor General's recommendations. So first question is really, what progress has been made to develop an overarching people strategy to aid in the One Gov initiatives? We'll start there.
Certainly going to be one for, I think, Mark and possibly John Quinn, then Mark. Obviously, there have been delays because of COVID, but there was a draft that was fairly close to being ready to go, I believe. John.
Yes. So the draft was developed at the end of last year. We had discussed it with ELT members initially. It was about to be repolished and taken to SEB for their review when COVID struck. So it is on hold at the moment. The plan is to, and it does need some revision to reflect COVID because our people's position has changed, as has the island's position in terms of employment. And some of the priorities will have to be slightly refined. But the plan is to bring it back to SEB in September. Mark,
obviously, SEB, State Employment Board, ELT is Executive Leadership Team.
Sorry, apologies. Mark, do you want to add anything?
Just briefly, Chair. In developing the strategy, we actually worked with over 400 members of staff in terms of workshops. We came up with, so we revised our values as an organisation, which is one of the recommendations from CAG. And within it picks up all the areas that the Controller and Auditor General recommended, including future planning and employee experience.
Thanks for that. There was an interesting quote in the report, and I'm sure you're aware of the report inside and out, where the CNAG said there is no overall statement, for example, within a people strategy of what the states want to achieve as an employer that in turn drives the scope and nature of the employment codes of practice and supporting HR policies and guidance. Therefore, this means that codes, policies and guidance are developed developed in a vacuum. Have you taken that on board, and when you bring it back, is part of that being addressed? And I guess that's a follow-up question to what you just told the panel.
I think Mark, that's probably one for you.
So yes, Chair, it has. So we've got a framework which the people strategy sits at the top of. In that people strategy, there are 4 key areas, which are the statements of intent. One of those is around the employee leadership, employee experience. One is around leadership. One is around employee development, and one is around developing the future workforce. So from those, we now start to hang our new policy framework and our action plan. And our action plan have a number of key work streams defined under that will go to the State's Employment Board in September.
And following on from that, so the tracking document and the work going on, will you be able to publish that or at least share it with this panel so we can see that?
So that the strategy itself will be published and the key work streams underneath that will be published. There's a performance framework within the government where we report against everything that we're going to be doing on the people strategy. That goes to the State's Employment Board, and I'm sure the Chief Minister will have a view about how he shares that with members.
Apologies, we had a bit of a dropout there, but it's my end, so apologies for that, everybody. Carrying on, in September 2019, the CNAG released a report on the financial management and interim control. This highlights that, of course, her previous recommendations had not or had only been partially implemented. So do you intend to carry out these recommendations by the CNAG, and is there an update on that you can provide us?
I think this one's the Chief Executive, and he's poised to answer the question.
So we will be looking to implement the majority of the recommendations, albeit that some of the recommendations obviously referred back to the former MTFP process rather than the government plan arrangements, and obviously the introduction of the new PFL law has enabled us to make some further changes which would not necessarily all link back to the CNAG's recommendations, but will certainly either enhance them and or cover the principles behind them.
Probably worth making the point, PFL is Public Finances Law and CNAG stands for Controlling Minister General.
Good stuff.
Thank you, Chief.
In terms of the other recommendations, can you give a sort of overview and where we are with a majority, because there was many, and I think for public record it's always good just to sort of update the record, so to speak, on many of the other recommendations in the report. Is it something you can give us now?
Well, I think the report, if you went through it, Chair, highlighted where we'd already implemented or partially implemented. I mean, clearly some of the ability to deliver more work and refine the embedding process that's highlighted in each of the recommendations where we've said implemented but not embedded. So by way of example, some of the things that we've been trying to do about longer term strategic planning arrangements, etc., some of the performance references, these are currently delayed as a consequence of COVID. So I can provide at a later date an update on the recommendations that were contained within the report, but we already do that for PAC, and part of PAC's review that we've been doing for some time is to ensure that we follow up with those members the recommendations for each of the CNAG's reports, and we use the tracker that has been introduced to be able to do that and update members and the Assembly accordingly. So I'm not sure whether going through the various recommendations line by line in this meeting would be a good use of the time, but you will certainly get that through the process I've just described, Chair.
That's really helpful. So I guess the simple follow-up question here is, what would you identify as the absolute priorities, and equally, which are the ones you may say, well, they're not going to be completed for whatever reason?
Well, clearly some of the priorities around performance and the introduction of what would be called an appraisal process, my goals, my conversation, and embedding that is key. And we are facing some challenges about how we do that in the light of the COVID pandemic, but those key aspects of holding people to account is part of the work that we will be introducing. We believe that we will have all the changes for the accounting officer recommendations implemented within the year, which is absolutely critical in holding people to account. And we also believe that on a broader performance framework level, that we would be wanting to deliver the recommendations as part of our commitment in 2020 on the government plan to improve the level of performance management information across the government. As far as some of the implementation for changes to the government plan process, I have to say that I think the government plan this year is going to be somewhat different from what was originally envisaged because of the COVID position, and therefore I would reserve our position pending the Council of Ministers deliberations, which are ongoing at the moment, about exactly how they want to take forward this government plan. And it may well be, therefore, that some of those recommendations will really see the light of day in 2022 government plan rather than 21. We do believe that we are implementing a number of the sub-recommendations. Zero-based budget reviews, for example, were started, paused, and have been restarted. We think that there will be aspects of where the fiscal policy panel's recommendation about some of the replenishment of key funds will be impacted by the overarching financial arrangements that the Council of Ministers will want to see in a revised government plan. So some of those recommendations will partially be implemented, but will also be affected by the changes that I just referenced. I think in terms of other aspects, I would clearly, in looking at all of the recommendations around the business planning and financial planning, they will, I think, have been improved in the year, but they will be subject again to whatever the Council of Ministers believe is the right way of delivering a balanced budget from 2021 to 2024.
Okay, thank you, Chief Executive. We'll leave that point there and may pick it up towards the end. But again, we're up against the clock. So I'm going to introduce now Deputy Ward, who's going to take on the next section of questions.
Hello, thank you very much. This section of questions regards employees of States of Jersey law 2005. What changes to the said law are anticipated to impact on One Gov initiatives?
This one too.
It's Mark.
Mark, maybe. Mark?
Thank you, Deputy. We're not envisaging any structural changes to One Gov. The law changes are about three things. First is around the roles and responsibilities of the State's Employment Board. In that, and this links back to the previous question about the auditor's report, that's about how they set the direction, the policy and the assurance. And there's some clarification points there. There's another matter there around the discharge of duties and the division between the state's members and officers, accountable officers. And the third part of that is around the Jersey Appointments Commission and their independence, because at the moment they report to the State's Employment Board, their independence from the government so they could act as a regulator. So none of them would impact on the One Gov approach.
So in terms of the State's Employment Board, they would take full responsibility and the only people who can employ people for the States of Jersey. So would that include all temporary contracts as well?
So that was a recommendation in the auditor's report, that they have oversight of interim and agency workers. They're not the employer of agency workers, but they are responsible for the policies that impact agency workers. That is already the case, though.
Okay, so will there be any further increase in responsibility of the chief executive?
So I think the key bit on the changes in the law would be about the accountabilities for the chief executive being much clearer and brought up to date in the revisions that would be required to support the original P1 arrangements from 2018. I'm not totally sure where the question was going about any wider aspects of that process.
Well, the question was regarding whether there would be any increase in responsibility of the chief executive. So will these, can you see, we recognise P1, but will there be any, well, as the question suggests, will it give more responsibility to yourself?
Well, I think the key bit about the change, the law, the 2005 law, is it's not been updated and takes account of the principal accounting officer responsibilities. So it's seeking to get more clarity about the accountability framework for the chief executive, rather than further levels of responsibility beyond what is already the chief executive's remit as the PAO.
Right, okay. And the reasoning behind the changes is purely to update, is it?
So the original requirements was that the States of Jersey Law 2005 is really out of date in reference to where we are now for some aspects of the employee-employer relationship, and that needs to be updated because it's, as you know, 15 years since that's happened. As part of that, there will be some aspects of the previous law that will still stand, but there will be further arrangements that will be have to be updated and take into account changes that have happened, both as a consequence of the move to cabinet government that was taken in 2005, and the establishment of the Council of Ministers and the role, as well as the reporting arrangements that I've just talked about for the accountability of the chief executive and other senior officers accordingly.
I think it's also probably important to point out that any work on that has all been delayed, again, you know, subject to the comments we made already, because of the last 3, 4, 5 months on COVID.
Okay, I think I'm conscious of time. I think that's all I've got on that. So I think we're going to move on. It's Deputy Morell next, I think. Deputy Paplin.
Yeah, thank you, Deputy Ward. So yeah, it's over to Deputy Morell's got a series of questions, and we will, if time allowing, follow up on anything that's come up in other people's questions. But yeah, over to Deputy Morell.
Thank you. I'm just going to talk about Team Jersey for a little bit. With regard to Team Jersey, what are the specific success measures that will enable us to understand whether Team Jersey has been a success or not?
Okay, John, I think it's one for you.
Yes. So,
actually, just the record was John's just getting ready. Obviously, because the hearing is split, Andy Bell is actually on annual leave today, which is why he can't be present at the hearing. That's why John will be on stream.
So there were 3 phases to the Team Jersey programme. Each of them have measures attached to them. So the first phase was the discovery phase, and actually this was an output measure, which was the publication of the report, which was made last year. The third phase is around establishing the people services capabilities around core activities like talent management, like resourcing. And again, those are largely output measures where we will measure the activities in place and the fact that we've created that functionality. The main part of Team Jersey, though, was the culture change programme, which is phase 2. That has a series of input measures around attendance, volumes of activities, and it has some output measures around staff engagement, which we are continuing to refine.
And so obviously some of them are theoretically objective output measures, but obviously output measures you can measure in terms of quantity, the amount of output, but also the quality of that output. Who actually will be assessing the success of Team Jersey? Who will be doing that assessment?
So in terms of, if we take the sessions, we measure qualitatively every session that is delivered has a feedback from the participants. Those are monitored when we were running the sessions. Obviously, the sessions are on hold at the moment because we can't legitimately get 16 people together in a room to deliver the sessions, although we are looking at re-establishing delivery using some virtual means in the autumn. But up until the point where they went on hold in March, the output measures in terms of the quality of the delivery was recorded after each session through a feedback mechanism, which was at the day through tablets, and they were monitored by the board. We have a programme board for the Team Jersey, which I chair, which Catherine Madden chairs. I'm the SRO, and we review those stats every month.
Obviously, those stats are about individual sessions, but about as you said, phase 2, the main bulk of the work is about culture change. Okay, people may have enjoyed a particular session and thought it was very good, but the next morning they may forget everything that was said in that session. So how are you assessing that wider cultural change? So
we are still working on that. We have redone our staff engagement model, and we are actually in the middle of the survey at the moment to provide that baseline against which we will then measure some of the attributes that are in that engagement survey as they develop over the next couple of years.
And so it sounds to me like the assessment then is done by the programme board, was it that you called it? And it's internal.
The assessment is done by the programme board on a monthly basis. It's reported to the executive leadership team and to the One Gov political oversight group on a quarterly or more regular basis if required.
And the survey is conducted externally, is not done internally. So therefore there's a validation process that comes with a weighting around all of the measures that are used on that, and that benchmarked then survey on survey, because we don't do it every year. And in addition to that, the State's Employment Board gets updates periodically as well.
Thank you. Can I ask, who is ultimately responsible or accountable for the success of Team Jersey?
So I am the Senior Responsible Officer for the Team Jersey programme. So yes, myself.
And from the perspective of TDP, if you were unhappy with the performance of Team Jersey, what kind of measures could you take to reflect that?
So, well, I mean, if it's about measures, if I was unhappy with the performance of TDP delivery, then I would just have a normal conversation as you would with any supplier. But ultimately, it's a commercial contract, so we have a right of termination as you would with any commercial supplier.
And the contract has a whole series of performance metrics in it as well, and there are some obvious milestones that have to be achieved. Now, unfortunately, as you can imagine, some of those for 2020 have been impacted again by COVID.
And relating to COVID, with that, is there a thought that the Team Jersey contract may need to be extended?
I think it's likely to have to be extended in two respects. So one is in terms of time, because meeting some of the contract deliverables in terms of the number of sessions that we will run with staff will almost certainly go beyond the March 2021 date, which was originally envisaged, because we're effectively having a 6-month hold on those deliveries. So we will be extending the contract in terms of time to allow the sessions that we've already committed to be delivered. We are also now looking at how Team Jersey supports the recovery of the government post-COVID, particularly around how do we leverage the successes that we've had during COVID, because there's lots of very good cross-team working which has come out of the need to respond rapidly. How do we leverage that? But also, how do we help departments develop a new way of working on, which will have to be developed as a result of COVID? So it is likely that we will change the scope as well.
How long do you think the extension will need to be for?
I wouldn't expect it to be more than 12 months.
Although obviously the COVID pandemic so far has only been 4 or 5 months, are you expecting Team Jersey to do no work between now and another 6 months' time?
No, so I think there is 6 months extension to make up for the lost time of delivery, because we won't realistically start delivery again until September. There's no point in trying to start delivery during the summer holidays. And then I think alongside that, there is some work to do in 2 phases. So one is supporting departments in their recovery, and the other is to develop an internal capability, which we did have to put on hold, and which, because we haven't been able to recruit within people services during this current time, will take us longer to develop. So I don't say it will be 12 months, I say it won't be more than 12 months.
And do you expect...
Sorry, Deputy, the other aspect of that is, should there be further spikes which change the method of how we engage and deliver the programme, we have to be realistic that may well see some of the levels that we currently operate at changing, which may impact on the way in which we can deliver some of the training and development programme. So as part of that, that's why the earlier reference to what we might be doing online and how we might change to a more virtual capability is being developed at the moment, to try and account for the possibility, and I stress possibility, of any changes that may come to our operational arrangements. And then obviously that we cannot at the moment predict. So there is a degree here of prudence being put into the sorts of timeframes that we're talking about, in case we get a rise in our situation over the winter months that then drives through, for example, till next spring, and before the other mitigation for COVID comes into play. So we're not suggesting that we just extend it for the, without there being some recognition of the need to also adjust what it is that they, how it is that they're going to deliver the product that they are committed contractually to do so.
Thank you. In terms of helping with the recovery, why would that work fall to Team Jersey directly? Why would that not be sought as a tender or some other wider commissioning process to see if others may deliver it more effectively?
So what we want to do is to build on the work that's already been done. And you'll probably be aware that we've done a number of departmental interventions that build on that framework, in particularly in GHE, where we did an intense session to help them create their licensing and oversight function. I think that the benefit of extending the Team Jersey work is to ensure continuity, so that rather than coming in with yet another initiative, most senior managers particularly will have been through some or all of the programme by the end of this year. Well, they've all been through some of it already, but most of them will have been through all of it by the end of this year or early next year. And therefore leveraging, so we've already started talking about high performing teams, we've already started talking about emotional awareness, and actually we want to leverage that rather than coming in with here's another way of doing things.
Thank you. In terms of that recovery work, Would you undertake this is refers to the report that comes from my proposition a year or so ago. Would you undertake a needs analysis to ensure, before just extending the contract in this area, in order to keep them focused and understand exactly what it is they're trying to achieve?
So yes, we have already, what we're doing is we're organising meetings with each of the leadership teams of the department, so the Director Generals and their direct reports, to identify what support they will need going forward. And those meetings start at the end of this month. So the very first one is the 29th of July, and they'll run through the summer and early into the autumn as availability comes, so that we can do a diagnostics piece before we start the work. Yeah.
And what do you anticipate the cost to be of these extensions?
I don't have a figure at the moment. Once we've done the diagnostics, we'll be able to identify what work needs to be done.
How much has actually been paid to Team Jersey so far?
I don't have the exact numbers. I can get them back to the panel, but I don't have them on me, unfortunately.
Okay. And will you be putting any contingencies in place to ensure there are no further extensions of this contract?
Yes. So part of the again, currently on hold work is to develop an internal capability. So again, just before COVID struck, we had agreed to start the recruitment of an internal delivery capability so that we could start to deliver the sessions that have been designed by TDP ourselves, rather than relying on their staff to do that delivery. That obviously, again, got stopped because recruiting wasn't possible during the first phase of the pandemic. We will go back to that. So the intention is that Team Jersey as a brand is an enduring brand that will go on hopefully forever. TDP's involvement in that will cease, and it will be an entirely internally run program.
And that was always the case. That's never been not the principle. It was part of the original contractual arrangements to be able to build capability and capacity. It's not sensible, in my professional experience, to have an organisation constantly leading that. If you don't embed it in the core business arrangements for the organisation, then you won't be able to get the benefit. So the long-term ambition has always been to build up our own abilities and capabilities to deliver this in-house.
And in terms of the, sorry,
I was going to say the upskilling is in two areas. One is a delivery capability for sessions that we've currently designed, and the other then is a diagnostics capability in order that we can design future sessions, because we want to be able to evolve the program as the organisation evolves, and again, not rely on having to pull people out, external organisations back in.
Thank you. I'll now hand over to Deputy Ayer, who's going to ask a few questions about target operating model.
Thanks very much, Kirsten. In a recent letter to the Chair of Corporate Services Scrutiny Panel, the Chief Minister stated, "Review of target operating models is a continuous process reflecting the changing needs of the organisation and our customers. Will this mean that changes to the target operating models will never end?"
Yeah, the short answer is yes. I think certainly in any organisation I've either been in or encountered, if you get a culture of change and get it embedded, then actually you will have almost a continuous process of change as the organisation evolves. It's not a static process, because otherwise it then becomes stagnant. Charlie or John, do you want to talk?
Yeah, I mean, I would always say that right from the beginning, the introduction of changes in the organisational structure has been the focus for a lot of people, but actually it's only one part of the wider changes that we are trying to bring about, and we just touched on some of that in the previous discussion. So as you go through and change models of service delivery, you would expect to change organisational structures. So by way of example, in the context of the ITS project, that's the information technology and systems changes we're bringing in. We know that we'll be moving to a more automated arrangement, which is in keeping with most modern organisations' remit, but here the public service is incredibly reliant on manual processes, which means that you have large numbers of headcount involved in activity that could be done cheaper and be better for the use of public money, as well as being more effective and efficient and avoid potential areas for error. So, for example, when we talked about the Treasury and Exchequer changes, we said over a period of 2 to 3 years, as those system changes came into place, we will change the organisational structure to accommodate that. We said the same around a whole range of other services that we are looking to modernise and update. So it's never been that the target operating models and the support for those will come to a full conclusion at any one time. What we did say, and what we have continued to do, is that we would deal with different levels of the first phase of those target operating models. And obviously some have been changed, as we discussed at the last hearing, due to assembly decisions or political changes, and therefore that has skewed some of the delivery and target dates. In other cases, though, we will continue to make further changes as a consequence of, for example, propositions that have been brought, or the arrangements around just recently the issue of regulation powers, etc. So this will not be something that stops. However, what I don't expect it to be is the whole of the organisation always going through lots and lots of changes for each department at the same time, every year, all year, on an ongoing rolling programme. It will vary, it will change, and it will depend entirely on what it is that's seen that needs to be taking account of either investment in technology, as I just explained, political priorities and changes, and or other arrangements that may be taking place.
Thank you. At the start of the process, it was mentioned that 22 directors would be removed from the organisation. Has this been successfully implemented?
Yes.
So there has been an overall reduction in the number of Tier 1 and 2 employees since you took office?
And that has been documented, evidenced and produced for numerous scrutiny meetings in the past.
Thank you. And there has been mention that when the target operating model has been delivered, news of job cuts has been put forward insensitively. Have lessons been learned in communicating the target operating model?
I think, Deputy, you're referring to a piece in the paper today. I would suggest that that was that quote came in reference to a particular issue rather than that is the general position. Of course, any potential reduction in headcount or changes in jobs will always create uncertainty. We've been through a whole range of changes over the last couple of years, and within that there have been times where people feel quite acutely worried about what the impact might be for their jobs. Actually, as the Chief Minister made clear in the last session that we had, this is all not about lots and lots of headcount changes. It's part of organising ourselves in a better way and also creating much more cross-cutting arrangements for the delivery of services. As a consequence of that, there have been some job losses and there have been numerous savings made, but it is not the sole purpose for the target operating arrangements. And I think the Chief Minister also drew the committee's attention to the fact that we have this unique situation in Jersey around demographic headcount numbers, which allows us to do things in a very different way here, which we can phase in changes over a number of years. So in direct answer to the question, inevitably some people will think things were done insensitively. But I think as a general rule of thumb, The communication has been comprehensive. We've gone through huge amounts of consultation, and as part of that, we have learnt from lessons that we have that have been through the different phases of the target operating model. But it is not now, I think, generally seen as being something that creates those sorts of sensationalist headlines.
But there has been, currently, there's some increase in FTEs, I believe. Technology Transformation Programme are intending to take on 52 extra staff. The COO himself is taking on 11 extra staff. Is there a policy of increasing public sector recruitment at the moment? And how will this impact the target operating model process?
So just to be clear, when we when the government plan was agreed last year, there was a recognition that there was going to be, in certain areas, growth, particularly around those areas that you have just identified. And it was never not identified and made clear to members that there would not be recruitment in those areas. However, in other areas, as a consequence of, for example, investment in the technology and having the capability to do that in-house rather than outsource it, rather incur greater costs and have jobs that are not locally based, there will be compensatory savings in other parts of the organisation. And we've been clear, for example, in the efficiencies programme and the profiling of that was going to be backloaded, and that will come into play around 22, 23, and that will be significant amounts of public money that will be saved. But we had to invest up front to do all the work to enable us, by way of example, to migrate all the systems that we have, as we have documented in all of the business cases, to make changes to. So yes, there will be some areas where there'll be growth. We also acknowledged last year in the government plan that part of the government plan was dealing with some areas where some short-term measures have been put in place, and that the government took decisions to invest in those areas on a permanent footing. By way of example, the work on Brexit, and there were other areas as well. So none of that is new. It was well documented. It was evidenced in the scrutiny meetings last year. And as a consequence, where we are implementing those investment programs and recruiting staff, we are doing so.
Have some of these increases been solely due to the pandemic?
Well, inevitably, we also have a different set of issues around the pandemic. So by way of example, our test and trace program at the moment, we have had to recruit people to be able to support it in order to release staff back to their BAU functions, business as usual. We do have some new areas in the COVID, as a result of the COVID impact, which we again are having to invest, particularly in the health area. Support for how and in what way we provide, for example, public protection and personal protection arrangements is another area. So yes, we have had to do some short-term and medium-term interim recruitment where appropriate. We are currently, though, looking at the longer-term arrangements to support any legacy that comes out of COVID that we would then need to have maintained to provide the right mitigation and comfort and security to the island, that we are able to deal with some of the impacts of COVID going forward, should there be further rises in or spikes in activity.
Thank you. I'll pass over now to Deputy Ward for the next question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I was going to ask some questions on this similar area. What level of perhaps power or influence do Director Generals and the Chief Executive hold in driving change in the structures of specific departments for the delivery of services?
Can you clarify what do you mean by
well,
that?
I paused because I was thinking perhaps I should give you an example. So, for example, outsourcing of parts of a department service, where would the drivers come from, and who would have the final say if any of the service was contracted out or transferred to arm's length organisations, for example, within the new One Gov structure?
Well, the reason I asked that question is there's also a divide, as it were, or a barrier between operational and obviously policy side. So if it's an operational issue and potentially not particularly material, I would expect it lies within the DG. However, I think there would be an expectation that if it was a significant change, particularly and obviously if it was any change in policy, then that the minister would, the relevant minister, or States and Point Board, depending what we were dealing with, or council ministers, again depending what the issue is, it would refer up to them. It depends on the level of the change you're talking about and whether it's operational or effectively a significant change in policy.
So if it was, for example, to set up an arm's length body to deliver something that doesn't exist, would that go to the minister and subsequently come to the States Assembly? Just trying to get a picture of, you know, where the drivers are and where the final decisions are made, really, to understand the One Gov structure in work, you know, actually in action.
I think it always depends on the specifics. So as I'm sure you're aware, we also always take advice from the relevant law officers and also the Director of the States. So in terms of the kind of things we're relating to, it depend on the nature of the specific issue. It would certainly go up to the minister. It then depends on what the nature of the law is as to whether it goes to the Assembly, and/or one would tend to assume that at the very least scrutiny would be briefed, and/or in the same way as we've been doing over the last few months, members would be briefed.
Can I just ask one quick thing on that? Can I just ask, sorry, just to confirm, do you think it would be politically expedient for any major change to come to the Assembly in that way, given that there are significant, there could be, I mean, we already have arm's length organisations, but if any others were to be set up, for example?
I think it depends on the circumstances at the end of the day, and it depends what the law requires.
Okay, so right, so you would go on the law requirement rather than, okay, that makes sense.
It depends, you know, if there's a legal requirement, therefore to speak for itself. Anything else, it'd be a political judgment depending what the issue is. Yeah,
I think this comes from the fact that ministers have said in the States Assembly that they're not fans of outsourcing, and so it's obviously important for us to understand the relationship between the One Gov structure, that decision-making process, and where the minister would step in if, as they've said, they're not fans of a process. It helps us understand that relationship.
I think it'd be fair to say at the moment, obviously, outsourcing has not been taking place. That's why it's a little bit of a hypothetical question. And that's why I'm suggesting it will depend on, I mean, as far as I'm aware, it's not on the agenda at this stage. It'd be one of those it depends about the materiality, is it operational, and at what point it goes up to the minister and then goes, if you like, into the wider political sphere. So it will very much depend on what those circumstances are.
Okay, thank you for that. I'll pass back to Deputy Pamplin.
Thanks, Deputy. Just got a couple of minutes to mop up. So I want to go back to my position as coming in Chief Minister, as a chair who's picked up this previous review panel's work and trying to get a sense of how it's changed in the 2 years since the review started. So question for you really, since walking in as Chief Minister and now 2 years into the gig, so to speak, just talk to me how you perceive it as Chief Minister. And again, I want to push on the side of things that still need to be worked on, because we're hearing a lot of positive things, and that's fine and important. But I want to hear about the challenges that you see that you would like to get in place before the end of your next 2 years, really.
Okay, there's quite a lot in there. So when I came in, and I think that also relates to what I might have seen in either effectively your position, as it were, or you know, as a member in the past, in times of either as I sort of like the term backbench, as a member of not a member of the executive, or as an assistant minister in the past. And so I see quite significant change from all the experiences I've had in terms of when I stood, at the last elections, organisational culture, the breaking down of the silos, the organisation coming in to essentially to be fit for purpose for the 21st century, all those types of things, and all those frustrations we've seen over goodness knows how many years, I see a real drive to change that. I think we're starting to see that, and there will always be some people, when you're in the middle of change, find it difficult. You get anecdotal feedback, which is conversations you have with officers who you might have had a relationship with in the past in terms of working with them, and generally, I think, in fact, pretty well all cases, they've been positive about embracing that change and about seeing change actually happening. I think in terms of my personal experience and seeing, trying to deliver change, there is definitely a speed, a pace that I've never seen before, and that is a good thing. I think also, and really without going on for too long, if you then look at the response to COVID, and I've said this before, and I've said it with Charlie, with the Chief Executive in the room, so I'll say it again and not throw his blushes. I think we have a huge debt of gratitude to the Chief Executive and his team for how we have all brought this island through COVID-19 since it kicked off in the early part of this year. I don't think under the previous structure we would have been in as good a place and able to move as quickly as we have done. There's been a huge role for Assembly members as well, and in scrutiny for the speed at which, as you know, certain things have been looked at and examined. But I don't think we've been in that position to get that to Assembly members in the way that has been this time around under the kind of earlier structure. I think actually it's also worth making the comment, which I'll hand over to John Quinn, which was his experience of MD effectively and the target operating model, and whether he would have been able to do what he needed to do without that restructuring. But I'll let him come in at the very end on that if he needs to. We may just say yes. The other point, I think, just keeping on time, the sheer level of change that has been going through, and I'm thinking if you look at what's come clear over the last 18 months, and what was very clear, and we did a briefing to state members, you may recall, in about September time last year, which was one of the issues, might have been end of September, which is around some of the reasons we were doing the investment we needed to do in, for example, our IT systems, the various issues we were facing. The fact that, for example, J.D. Edwards has not really been maintained, as I understand it, since about, I'm going to say 2005, which I wasn't aware of when I came into the Assembly at the end of 2005. So that underlines the sheer lack of investment that's been going in, and that for which we've been, if you like, paying the price over the last few years, and that's also around how you get the data into the right place to make good decisions. And I think actually the fact that some of those changes were happening before the beginning of this year and before COVID came through, all I'll say is thank goodness they were happening. There was some criticism at the time of the volume of the investment, but you look at where we are now. As I said this previously, the fact that we're doing remote, we've had a remote parliamentary meetings. I think Deputy Labby, or Deputy Russell Labby referred to that as being the first Parliament or Assembly in the Commonwealth to have done it in full. All those are pointers as the level of change we have all achieved in a very short space of time, but the foundations were being set through the One Gov programme, and they need to continue.
Sorry to cut in because of time, but just very quickly. So at the end of the day, that's all well and good, and I can sense what you're saying, but at the end of the day, it's all about the results, and it's all about the savings that will be judged upon in terms of the taxpayer and in terms of all of us, really, when we go back to the electorate. So can you now see, when we get to the next election, there'll be an obvious figure shown of what the savings are to the taxpayer? Because I think everything you've just said is valid, but there is still a perception on this island, and I'm not talking about media headlines or social media, I'm just generally talking about real people who I talk to, that you talk to. There's still a perception problem on this island. So when we look at it, two things. Where are the savings? How will that be translated? And how do we go about getting the island on board, who are still sceptical with every survey? We could sit here for hours, but could you just quickly summarise the challenge ahead with dealing with that?
Okay, in terms of the data, if you like, will we see savings? There's the 6-monthly report that is due to come out, which is meant to be about holding us all to account, and particularly Chief Executive and his team, is due to be produced by the end of August. So at that point, you will see the data, which will demonstrate that. I always have a caveat as an accountant, which is obviously you've got to bear in mind, we will see the savings, but you will also see the extra spend that we've had to do through COVID. So you need to make sure that you do not lose sight of that, and do not lose sight of the fact that savings and restructuring and doing things in a better and efficient way are still carrying on. There's obviously been delays, as we referred to, because of COVID, but there will also be significant extra spend because of COVID. And you've got to make sure we keep those two things separately. The COVID spend is going to be effectively, I hope, one-off, and generally should be non-recurring spend. But it's difficult to have at this point at what point we'll go back to normal, as opposed to even a new normal, versus the savings side is a recurring saving that you'll see on revenue expenditure. And sometimes that can be in delivering services more efficiently, which means delivering more for the same level, or it is actually a reduction in spend. But you will see part of that coming through. But as I said, don't forget the COVID-19 impact as well.
Of course, and I think none of us will, and I think this will be an ongoing process. And looking at the time, we're bang on 2 o'clock. Talking about efficient, that's how I like to run meetings. So on that note, thank you, Chief Minister, thank you, Chief Executive, and everybody for joining us. And we look forward to future engagements and the release of this interim report that will be coming up in the coming weeks. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.